everyone, and welcome to the Quilt Show. Pack Mule Justin's bringing in the quilts again. But you know what? This time it's quite all right, because on set today is one of our TQS favorites, Edyta Sitar. And somewhere in this mountain of beautiful quilts is our 2018 TQS Block of the Month. But you're going to have to stick around to find out which one it is. Stay tuned.
And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Can we just talk about walking onto the set this morning? Wow.
Yeah, wow. And audience, what do you think about this today, right? I know. Often on the Quilt Show, we have guests that will repeat. And they repeat for good reasons, but this one is like the Energizer Bunny, and she keeps just keeps going and going for sure. So please welcome back to the Quilt Show one of your favorites, Edyta Sitar. Hey, Edyta.
Welcome.
Hi.
So
nice to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
The last time we saw you on the show, we were in Bozeman, Montana, having a great time. We did.
Totally fun. So you are so prolific, and I learned setting up right now to interview that you make all these quilts. You don't have little
Elves.
helpers.
No elves.
Yeah, I try to do all my quilts myself because it allows me to go through the process and really, what more fun than make your own quilts?
Right.
I think we're quilters. We love to enjoy quilting, even teaching, but making quilts is still my favorite thing to do.
But even with making all the quilts, you're still writing new books, of which we're going to share today. I mean, like there's 2 or 3 new books that we're going to talk about today. One of them is called Handful of Scraps.
Yes, yeah. I have a book called Handful of Scraps. In it, we have 15 large projects. And basically what I want is the girls to reach out into the bucket and grab a handful of scraps and make beautiful quilts.
And is that what the first quilt is about that we're going to talk about?
The first quilt is in a book, but it is an antique quilt from the Grand Rapids Public Museum. And the one that I brought it to you is a reproduction of that quilt.
It is just, listen to the audience. I mean, goosebumps and everything. So tell us about the quilt, more about it, the fabric choices and the layout and the design, all of that. Tell us.
Well, I was inspired by antique quilt, but many times in quilts, when I do scrappy quilts, I try to enjoy everything that I have in the scraps, but I also find an area that I can anchor up the scrappiness. And in this case, your sashing and those pink low squares are the anchor of the scrappiness. And I love smaller pieces, so this one really tickled my elbow.
Sure, and I think that one of the big things with scrappy quilts, tickled my elbow, that's great. One of the things that I do love about scrappy quilts that you do so well is you talk about the anchor. Something's got to hold it all together because there's so much different fabric. You've got to give it some order.
Yes, some area that your eyes can rest for a moment and tie things together. So for me, putting that pink between, it was like just an area that as I look through the blocks, I have something common.
But it's not the same pink. That's also important.
Right. And I want to ask you too, do you say in your brain, okay, I'm going to make this block, and then you make 5 of them, and then towards the end you decide on the anchor? And I love that word.
Yeah, this kind of happens over the years that I have learned to plan it out. So anytime that I do scrappy blocks, I know that eventually I'm going to anchor up the scrappiness through the sashing, maybe binding, or I choose a similar color that I put in each of the block, and that ties things together for me.
So the handful of scraps kind of rolled into what?
Little handful of scraps. So really, in low handful of scraps, you can practice with 30 different small quilts, a smaller project. Practice different technique and see if you like that block. If you like 6 of them, you're gonna make 600 of them.
Sure. So, and that's this group that we're looking at. All of these are from the little handful of scraps.
Yes. So, and many times when I start up a quilt, I make smaller sample and I watch where my seam allowance is going, how I have to push, what locks, if the colors are playing nicely together, what needs to be done, and practice the technique. Some of them never end up to be a large quilt. Some of them, I go ahead and love it so much that I make dozens of the blocks.
I love that.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
great.
Okay, now I want to talk about this quilt over here. It has a special honor. It's just beautiful.
It calls Common Bride, and it's a very special quilt. Ricky was in New York with me that time at the Quilters Take Manhattan show. I was interviewed, and my quilt and the interview was put into Library of Congress.
That is, yes, fabulous. And the Quilters Take Manhattan, for people that don't know, is put on by the Quilt Alliance.
Yes.
Alliance for the American Quilt, and they do a lot of great things in just preserving our
the
heritage.
history. Yeah.
And it's always towards the end of September, correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, we
right.
had a little challenge there too. It was the heavyweight champion for quilters. So 3 designers battled for this beautiful big belt.
Yes, and you had to like make a quilt in what, an hour?
Half an hour.
Half an hour. They
Yes.
had to make a quilt from start to finish in a
Yeah,
half an hour,
it
and you
was
should
so
have
much
seen
fun.
it.
And
It
who
was
won?
fun.
Well, I got the honor to get the belt and brag it about it for 1 year. So.
Oh, then you got to pass it on?
Yep, then you pass it on to the next
love it.
winner next following year.
Now, you have a love affair of blue and white fabrics and quilts, and you have a book of that, which I saw it at Market when it was in pieces. It's one of the most beautiful books I've seen produced. Beautiful.
And so let's look at the quilt that's going to relate to that. Tell us about your blue and white.
That's a New York Beauty quilt, and many times I work with a lot of color, but sometimes I like to pull back and relax a little bit, and that's where my blue and white quilts come to picture. And I love the antique ones as well as the ones that I make. And the New York Beauty quilt is made with my Blue Sky collection that I designed for Andover.
And
Okay.
that's kind of new.
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
yes. I recently switched fabric companies. I used to design for Moda, loved it, 10 years, and recently got hired by Andover in New York, and feel super proud about it.
Speaking of the antique
Right here,
quilts,
yeah. Right
this
here.
is an antique blue and white quilt, pineapple quilt.
Yes. Yeah, and in the book, you will find in the beginning of the book a eye candy of antique quilts, and then it will follow with patterns and beautiful projects, large and small, where you can enjoy blue and white quilts. But in quilting, did you notice recently we have the movement of red and white, blue and white? Because sometimes quilters just want to take the time off from many colors. They just want to enjoy 2-color quilt. Doesn't mean that you only have 2 fabrics.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
No, correct.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
you
that's
could
one of the
have
beautiful.
a big stash, with it.
Absolutely.
And that's what I tell people, too. If you feel you have a monochromatic quilt in your soul, start collecting now, because the
Yeah.
more the merrier in my book.
So can we spill the beans on the next quilt?
Yes.
Can we do that? Because it's going to be blue and white, right? It's a blue and white
Yes.
quilt. Tell us all about it. It is.
It's your new block of the month, and I am honored that you allow me to design this new block of the month. It's a gorgeous sampler. It's a Patchwork Barn, and the design is inspired by all the travels that I do, and as I go through United States, I can see the barns and the beautiful blocks on
Yes.
it, and that's where the inspiration came from, and it's a just amazing quilt. I hope quilters come in and join us to do this
got
next
goosebumps.
year.
Yeah, I do too. So, audience and everybody at home, here it is, unveiled for the first time, the TQS BOM for 2018.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you, Edyta.
Now, Edyta didn't stop at that, just as an FYI.
It went a little further, right?
Yeah?
Yes.
So tell about part 2.
Part 2, this quilt will also be available in color. A little surprise. So the quilt has 24 blocks. You repeat those blocks 3 times to achieve all of the blocks in the quilt. Has touches of applique, the beautiful center barn block, and we're gonna have it also in color for anyone that.
Well,
like the scraps.
Well, and you even went further because if they don't want to make it this size, you've got a formula that they can even add it
absolutely.
to make it bigger.
You just add another row to it on the side so you can make it a little bit longer. But I thought with the 6-inch blocks, we really could practice fun techniques and maybe just relax a little bit and do things that we'll absolutely love it if it's a simpler block.
But you do have some more challenging blocks in there too. But it's a journey. It's a learning journey, which is great.
We're going to start up with the simple blocks, and then you will save all your scraps. So some of the blocks going to have a little bit more blue shades. Some are going to be basic. There's so much fun to do it. I have a confession though, it's like potato chips. Oh. I'm telling you, when you make one block, you're going to want to make the next one, the next one, the next one.
Be patient.
Be patient and enjoy the journey and a little bit of touches of applique. And what we will have available silhouettes for in a package. Yep.
Perfect.
Exclusive just for the quilt show for the quilt.
That's great.
Yep.
Thank you.
And now you know why we love her.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of love, it's always something borrowed.
Something blue?
No, something new.
New, that's it. See, I'm not a wedding guy.
Something borrowed.
Something new.
Something old.
Now, have we done it out of order? Something old, something new, something borrowed.
And definitely
something blue and white. That's what we're supposed to say.
Stick around.
Come back in a minute.
A human map of light opened up the way. A net of silver beads had shone, the dewdrops frozen on the lake. You know my heart is warm, a circle made in the night. My eyes for you, to hold on to. Everything was always there.
Welcome back. Edyta, I am so excited that you are the designer for our 2018 Lock of the Month. Happy New Year! Does it get better than that?
Thank you. It's my honor. It's just a pleasure. I had such a good time designing the quilt, and I hope you love everything that I prepare.
I love everything. I love it that you're into blue and white. So let's talk a little bit why you chose a monochromatic colorway, though we do have a complete colorway too.
Recently, I noticed that when I decorate my home, the blue and white quilts are so versatile. I can add yellow flowers and quickly have a farmhouse feel in my house. If I, over the holidays, put some silver, it's so special and it feels like Christmas. When I add a little bit red, 4th of July, I never had to change the quilt on the bed.
I think I'm liking this, right?
Yeah, it's super. And beach house, you just put some seashells next to it and it's very calming, super relaxing. So blue and white quilts are quite nice to decorate and they're timeless.
I was raised on blue and white too, so we're talking the same language, right? So this is the palette that you have provided for the block of the month. Tell us about it.
These fabrics are from Blue Sky collection, and the collection gives you a great variety of colors. And I like to have some darker shades and some lighter shades of blues. And when I design fabrics, I follow the rule of 5. And when I color coordinate my quilts, I follow the rule of 5. Big print, medium print, small print, stripes, polka dot. Perfect.
Yes.
We're gonna use a bundle like this to make our quilt, as well as we need a little bit of light for the sashings and a binding in a darker blue.
And I'm going to say the pattern. This is just the cover of it here, but I've peeked inside. It's beautiful. And I love the fact that there's easy blocks and complex blocks.
Yes, so we have a great selection of 24 blocks in it, and every block will be made 3 times. So when you do 3 blocks, you're practicing the technique and you're gonna be great in it. If you like some of the blocks more than other, you can make more of them and make your quilt larger, or replace some of the other blocks with the favorite ones. We all have favorites.
Right.
And then I had a centerpiece medallion, a barn, because the Patchwork Barn was inspired by barns in United States. As I travel many times, on a barn you see a block,
right?
A quilt block, and I thought this would be such a cool thing to put them all together.
I love it. I love it, and I think I'm going to do it.
Oh, absolutely! I'm going to make you do it.
There you go. You're going to come to my house and check it out, right?
If it takes, that's what it takes. I'm going to have to do it.
Awesome.
So for now, let's put those to the side. And when I make quilts, I focus on 1 block at a time. So let's start up with a simple block where we're only gonna choose 2 colors, and I have a darker blue and a background. And notice that when I choose my fabric, if I chose a polka dot for my background, I'm going to use medium print or another print for the pieces. I took fat quarters, cut them in half, and I'm working with fat 8s. I love working with fat 8s because they're smaller pieces to press it, and out of fat 8s, you get 3 blocks.
I like that idea. So you're not having to deal with all this yardage.
Yep. So when I buy fat quarters, I always cut them in half, and it gives me a little bit easier to rotate and play with it. I'm gonna be using a smaller rulers right here. And I chose 2 rulers, this 4.5 by 12.5, and a square ruler to square up my blocks when they're finished.
And a rotary cutter and thread,
absolutely.
and there you go.
And I love this one. This is a super cool rotary cutter, so you can use that. You're also gonna need a nice selection of threads. The light one is for piecing. The darker one is gonna be for our appliquing.
Okay.
So once we have our fabrics, all our tools, it's time to cut. And I quickly cut some of the pieces for our first blocks. It's just simple rectangle squares and a smaller squares. And I proceed by making my little 4 patches. So right here, I'm gonna make a 4 patch. I have 4 pieces of fabric, 2 darks, 2 lights. I'm gonna sew my pieces together just like this. And I have some already prepared sewn for you. Right here. Follow the pattern. Many times I do give you a nice idea where to push your seam allowance. I'm not controlling, but I would like you to follow. So in this case, because sometimes we're gonna follow towards dark, but there are some blocks that you have to follow the arrows because it helps you piece the block.
I agree with you 100%. It's about piecing it together properly.
And making 3 blocks, you can do first block my way, and then you can say, okay, I don't like this, I'm gonna do it your own way. So go ahead and try it, and then you can come back with
your way.
My way. So right here, I push the seam allowance towards the dark. And what I'm gonna do is place my pieces right sides together, beautifully sewed with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And as soon as you finish sewing, I'm gonna again press it, but this time I'm gonna press it following the clock, and in the center, I open the little center, so there is a least bulk here, and make my 4 patch for the center of my block. Once this unit is completed, we have a second unit for this block, where it's a simple unit of light and a dark rectangle. Sew them together. Magically, I have that done for you. Again, push the seam allowance towards
I love that you
dark.
include arrows. I think that's so important.
Yeah. It just helps, but I'm not always right, so do 1 block, see if you like what I'm doing. And if you don't, you have an option with the second, third block to do it your way. Now we're gonna put everything together, and we have our center four-patch that we have made, our little units with the rectangles, and then we have the simple squares, 2 lights and 2 darks that we have cut it. Now we're gonna sew rows, row 1, row 2, row 3. Again, follow the arrows on the pattern so that way when you have to sew everything together beautifully, your seams will lock right here, just right here. And I do love to use pins. So I would take a pin, pin it gently away from the seam right here, and then when I stitch, I remove the pin as I'm going with my sewing machine. And I have a block ready for you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
As soon as it's finished, from the back, I pay attention where the seams allowances are going. Again, push them, press it, and it's time to square out your block.
Beautiful.
And this is block number 1, and with this block, you just choose 2 fabrics. But as time progresses, you're gonna have leftovers because we're quilters, we love to save all the scraps. So I brought another block just to show you how fun it looks when you make it in just 2 colors. But notice what happened if you cut up a bunch.
Now we're talking.
Yes, yeah. Start cutting your fabrics. And what I like to do, I love to make scrappy quilts, but I always like to anchor my scrappiness. So in this case, I'm using my light background, and my light background is gonna be all the same through the block, and all my triangles going to be all scrappy. And I prepare one already. Let's put this here. And look at it. This is a scrappy version of that same block. Look how fun it looks. And I place the lighter triangles towards the center, the darker ones onto the outside. And if you don't like that option, quickly you can just turn things around, and you could do a block where the center is a little bit darker and the outside is lighter.
I love that. I love that.
You have 3 blocks. With every option, you can do one that it's simple, elegant, do some fun and scrappy, and add little spike to your quilts and have some fun
And it
with
all goes together.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what is gonna be fun, if you make 3 of the same blocks and place them through your quilt, the quilt have similar DNA. Yes, so it looks very like a family. There are some more difficult blocks in the block of the month, and one of them is our spool block. So to make this block, we're gonna start up with the center, and again, I'm reusing all of the little scraps and leftovers from previous blocks, and I cut 3 rectangles. I'm gonna sew them together. As soon as they're done, they will look like this. I will press my seam allowances towards one way. It doesn't matter which way you're gonna go. Follow the arrows. Then I'm gonna add on the left and the right side a little light background. And I did that again. And remember, in quilting, usually we are taught to push towards dark. In this case, we're gonna push towards light because we don't wanna fight those seams.
Right.
It's just gonna be too bulky.
Ease of construction.
Yep. And the quality of the fabric is beautiful. You're not gonna see any dark peeking through. Just enjoy it. The fabric I designed is from Andover, is super nice. Now, the top and the bottom of the spool is
Flip and sew.
yes, you love that.
I love flip and sew.
Awesome. So we're gonna put a square, draw a line, and I use this cute little pencil, and I use a smaller ruler and just place it, draw a beautiful line. And I always start from here and stitch to the outside, to the points. And once it's stitched, I'm going to trim it, seam allowance, press it, and I have my top and the bottom ready to add to my spool. And let me remove this one. I always use pins.
Yes.
And just a reminder, I push it towards the dark because it's easier to feel it where the transition happens right here. And I sometimes crease it.
And take a peeky peek.
Take a peek. If it's there, I push my pin through it, make sure you don't pull and push. This is a long distance to sew from here to here, so you don't want something to shift, so your blocks look beautiful. Yes.
Look at these. How fun is this? You like everyone? Yes? Love it. Love it.
So once we have our blocks completed, it's going to be wonderful. You put them into the rows, and you have plenty of fabric that you can make 4 of the same block, and then your quilt will be larger if you have a king-size bed. And we have applique on the left and the right of the...
Okay, so
yes.
talk about this, because this is really great.
Yes. So right in the center, we have a beautiful swag of flowers, and then we also have a swags on the left and the right, and we have all laser cut pieces, ready, set, go, and those going to be available through the quilt show just for this quilt. And in one package, you have enough for 1 border, and so you need 3 packages for the full quilt, left, right, and the center.
Okay, perfect.
The same package is just different layout for the center.
Perfect,
Yep.
perfect. Okay.
So we have everything ready, set, go, and we have those cut with fusible webbing on the back. So if you are a fusible applicator, you would enjoy that. Or if you are hand applicator, we have snippets what have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can then hand applicate.
Okay, now quickly,
Speaking of
thank you.
applique,
Thank you.
yes.
This is brilliant, okay, brilliant.
This is something new that we have. It's just amazing. What we have is a printed layout for appliques. Right there, you have a little bit of the border. Yep. So what you are able to do, you purchase a piece of fabric, and the fabric already has a layout printed on it. And if you would like to, you can embroider or hand applique to the line. Or if you like back basting, you just turn your fabric over. Your layout is in the back, you baste all your pieces, and then needle turn beautifully on the front as you're removing the basting right here.
And I want to be real clear that this is not connected to the BOM. This is just something else that you're doing.
Yeah.
But
it's a fun thing. I wanted to share this
I
with
love
you
it.
because it's totally new and exciting for
well, no one's
quilters.
done it in the quilting world. So we would be remiss if we did not talk about this particular quilt. Look, okay, so look at this. How wonderful.
Isn't it lovely?
And let's start with the back.
Well, anytime I look at American flag, it warms my heart because you know that recently I became American citizen.
No!
Yeah,
Yay!
Yep.
Yay!
It only took me 20 years to pass the test.
I could.
My husband says I'm a slow learner.
So when you this is not your fabric line, right?
As I travel all over and teach, I love to teach this block in my classes, and my students sign my quilt on the back. So you can use a label fabric as your backing instead of just applique one label. Why not make the whole quilt a backing to the whole fabric, make a backing to your quilt?
And you said there's many varieties of this type of fabric,
yep.
okay?
There are many companies that make beautiful label fabrics, and I bet many of you girls have some in your stash. Use them on the back of the quilt, baby quilt, for a shower, for a wedding, all the guests can sign. I'm having my students sign for me because my students are super special.
Well, also, I want to put this out here, this book of yours, and it is fresh off the press. And the layouts in here are just fantastic. And these were all shot at your house, right?
Yep, a lot of the pictures are taken in my house, and in the beginning of the book you have antique quilts, and then in the back of the book you have 17 patterns that are just delightful.
Absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
But going back to this quilt, my students are so special, and I thank you for following me and learning stuff from me, but also for being so kind to others. Recently, in one of my classes, after learning this technique, I asked a few of my students if they would join me to make a quilt for a super special girl. Her name is Katie, and Katie recently lost her mom. So when I asked the girls, every single girl stood up and wanted to make a block for Katie. And Katie received her quilt. She's a roommate with my daughter Anna in college, and it was just so delightful to see that as quilters, we spread such a joy to someone that the girls didn't even know. No, and Katie knows that she's loved and just truly enjoy her project. And me, as a teacher, as a quilter, I could not be more proud to be of this part of this community. And no matter what happened in the world,
well,
we stay united and we take care of each other.
Right on. I go with you on that. Okay, we've been doing blue and white, but up next, we are working in Technicolor. Stick around.
16 colors, 16 needles. High-speed embroidery creating at up to 1,400 stitches per minute. An extra-large embroidery field, 400 by 350 millimeters. Patented narrow cylindrical lower arm, the smallest in the industry. The Bernina hook system. A fabric-based tension system. A library of 1,000 designs. Automatic thread trim. Adjustable presser foot height. The new Bernina E16. High-speed embroidery with true commercial quality. From the intuitive user interface and the smallest cylindrical embroidery arm in the industry to an impressive array of optional accessories, the E16 is the perfect partner for home, studio, or commercial projects. Applique command, rotation 190 and 180, bright LED lights, network up to 6 machines. E16 tension system. This unique system ensures threads are fed smoothly and with automatic tension adjustments for the same perfect quality on every sew out. Embroider confidently, knowing each stitch out will be as beautiful as you envision. The Bernina E16. The stuff dream machines are made of.
Welcome back, everyone. We're about to do something we've never done on the Quilt Show before. Oh my gosh, you have, it's like going to be a bed turning here.
Yes,
Talking about scrap quilts, and I will tell you, you said you brought 4 suitcases worth of quilts just for this show today.
Yes.
That has to be a record. That's a lot of quilts. This is going to be basically coming from your book, Handful of Scraps.
Yes.
We talked about that earlier in the show. And these quilts are all scrap quilts, but scrap quilts often have more logic than people really see.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to look at. And all of the quilts that we've got here range from antique quilts to some of yours.
Some of mine.
Right.
There's some from the Handful of Scraps and also a few of my favorites that I thought I'd bring it with me.
Wow. Well, let's start with this first one, which is a wonderful 4-patch.
Yeah, and this one is an antique quilt. And what is so special about this one, when I first saw the quilt, I noticed the little 4 patches and how they matched in the center of each block. But I also noticed the rows of background that has been spilled through the quilt that gives a secondary design to the quilt. And I absolutely love that.
So I'm just looking again. So this has logic right here.
Yep.
There's the same fabric and the same fabric, and almost every time. I assume there's going to be changes every now and then.
Yeah.
But there's logic in that. But then there's places where it stops being logical.
Yes, and also like the directions of the dark colors floating through the quilt. What a beautiful secondary design. And I love putting a light background and seeing light background in a quilt because it pops the colors and pushes to the front. When you do a little darker version of this kind of quilt where you have 4 patches and do a darker background, it pulls the color back and cluster them. And I put rows in this quilt and put sashings in between and little inner borders. And I want to cluster the colors in a 1 rows.
Now, and I do see, of course, this has much more organization as a layout, but what I'm also noticing is your 4 patches are not the same fabrics in the 4-patch, but you have anchored them with the same fabric
color
going around.
Do you see? So when you make scrappy quilts, if we go just crazy scrappy all over, that's more crazy quilts. Here, we anchor some of the scrappiness and creating some kind of organization to the pieces. Putting a light around every block, just put a spotlight on that 4-patch.
It does.
And you bring that 4-patch right to the front. And this quilt is from the Handful of Scraps, and it's set into the medallion setting, and it's one of my personal favorites.
I love that.
Yep. I also own the antique quilt. It's in the museum right now.
So I'm also going to say, you didn't teach me this. I'm just observing, right? I'm now noticing that your 4 patches are, and maybe there's one that's not, but at least in this case, the darks are all going in the same direction.
Yep. Yep, of course. We wanted to do something surprise, and not as a surprise. I pieced 2 fabrics and make my 4 patch.
Just like Grandma did.
Yeah, you have to
Absolutely.
do this, and I do this quite often because I do my with strip piecing technique. So if one strip is too short, I just add a little bit more to
That's
it.
fabulous.
And it ends up someplace.
I love
yeah.
that.
I love, so some of the things we want to talk about is different shapes in quilting, and we start with one of the most popular shapes in quilting, what it's a square. Square, and from a square you can make a 4-patch, 9-patch, and keep going like this till you have a stemmed quilt.
Absolutely.
But, the next shape is if we take a square, cut it once in half, we get a beautiful half square triangles. And this quilt, remember we had a lovely exchange last time I visited you?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Half square triangles are so colorful, so much fun. We want to anchor them up with some fabric, give character to the quilt. So if I would have put all reds around it, it would be warmer. If I would put all blues, it would be colder, the whole quilt. So here I chose all different fabrics. I wanted to be scrappy, but I anchored the scrappiness with my favorite fabric. You have to choose fabric that has a lot of character to it. You know, this purple sure has some character. Now adding a light sashing pushes
Yes,
the color
absolutely.
to the front. Having that cornerstone in brown gives you an anchor to the scrappiness, so someplace in a quilt you can rest your eye as you're looking through all the scraps.
And all that sashing, both going vertically, horizontally,
Yeah.
and diagonally, it really contains
Yeah,
all
the
of this and
large.
helps it make one
Yep.
big triangle
Yep.
out of all the little triangles.
Yep.
You know, I'm reminded of a story you told us years ago when we first had you on the show, that you were making scrap quilts with little pieces, and your mom had a response to that. Tell everybody
Yeah.
that story, because it's a great story.
Where one of the first quilts I made for my mother, I worked so hard and made it from a lot of different scraps. And when my mother received the quilt, her hands dropped down and she said, "Oh, Edyta is really poor. She's sewing little pieces of fabric together." She didn't understand what was going on, why I cannot afford a one large solid piece of fabric, why I'm piecing those tiny little pieces. So that's my mother.
Is your mother now proud of all your success?
Oh, she's now proud of it, and she's an addicted quilter.
Yay,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
great.
So back into anchoring scrappiness, sometimes we can cluster the color in one area. Do you see what I did with the triangle?
The reds and burgundies.
Yep. And it gives us like an invisible border and anchor some of the scrappiness. So we have all crazy here. And as we're going to look at the outside of the quilt, it comes down, and then we use the beautiful fabric for the border. One of the first fabrics I ever designed.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And notice the difference between ocean wave, light background, ocean wave, dark background.
Right, let's do that one more time. So I
Yeah.
want to make sure we all catch it. So this is the
Yep.
ocean wave triangle blocks on the light background, and then done the same
And
thing,
this is
switching it out.
Light, dark background with the light pieces being bounced to the front. So
And you
look
know,
at the
I could have
contrast.
my favorite, but I know that we all have personal
Yeah.
choices. So
Yeah.
someone would like one versus the other.
Yeah, and how we can control the color of the quilt, the mood of the quilt, more muscular, more feminine, just by
Absolutely.
choosing the background and how we present the quilt. So sometimes I take scraps and anchor them in a block by cluster the same triangles in one block, and right here the bottom of the basket would be what anchors down. I want to push the fabrics to the front, so I chose rather light backgrounds. And because this was all triangle exchange, all my fabrics that are in a background, I also use scraps, so they're all different colors, just in the lighter tones.
Yeah, so these are all light, and I
Yeah.
like the fact that each basket kind of has its own flavor. If you were
Yeah.
at the candy store and all the different bonbons, this would be, you know, the vanilla, this
Yeah.
would be the
Yeah.
caramel, this would be the mint, and they all have their own flavor,
Yeah.
but they kind of all look the same.
And I kept a lot of them. The whole quilt has a feel of, because I have a lot of pinks, but then I have some browns and some blues to give a little bit oomph to it.
That's
So
wonderful.
from triangles, if you're lucky, your larger scraps would be strips.
Okay, and is this an antique
This
quilt?
is an antique quilt, one of my personal favorite, and one of the first ones that I purchased and start collecting antique quilts. And this one, notice it how we make sure that both of the strips are matching and how the color are clustered in one area. So as I purchase my quilts, I always love to look at them and see how the quilter anchor the scrappiness. What did she do she could have all difference, but no, she made sure that everything matches and weaves through the quilt.
Yeah, they're like their own little individual things.
There are some blocks that two different strips.
There's one up here on the side where it's a little bit different. But
and I love the usage of stripe fabric. Look at the different direction. It just gives the block such a fun color to it.
you know, when I look at old quilts or antique quilts or even contemporary quilts, I love the surprises.
Yeah.
Once you think you've got it figured out, and then there's the surprise. It's a kind of puts a smile on your face.
Oh, absolutely. When I was making this quilt, I actually want all the strips to be different colors. It was too busy. So I clustered the strips in groups of 3 and 4 strips, and it gave my quilt a little bit more calming feel to it. The light in between push my dark colors forward and really showcase, give a spotlight to it. But clustering the colors give a little bit more calm feel to the quilt, and a border on each side is in a different color. Let me just flip this.
Oh, it is.
So the border is different.
Oh, I see
What you
that.
can do it too with scrappy quilts.
So my question is, when you were saying that when I started doing individuals, it was too much. Did you have to start making that quilt and it said stop? This is out of control.
I lay things out, look at them,
okay.
and when I looked at them, I walk by, and that's, you know, feeling in your gut, you know you're not ready to piece it.
Absolutely.
So sometimes you can take scrappy basket and put them on the outside of the quilt, and again, I cluster all the colors. Instead of doing them all different scraps, I made sure that I have blue, reds, and this is example of a little bit muted background. Notice it how it pulls back the color, but it allows the lights pops and shine and glow through it.
These are so wonderful technique
Anchor
ideas.
Yeah. The center of your log cabin not always have to be a square, and most likely would be red. In this case, I did a triangle for the a center, and another perfect example of what you can do with strips. Most popular in quilting, when you have a strip, you want to make a log cabin.
Yeah, absolutely. But I love how that triangle has created almost a little snowball effect in the log cabin that we never get otherwise.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Wow. I
Yeah.
wanted to prepare you guys for this. This is insanity. It is insanity. It is.
It's
I mean,
an
look,
antique quilt.
those little diamonds are the
1/2
size of my pinky finger. They are hand pieced together. Oh.
This is a lovely example of when you have a strip, take your ruler, cut it on a 45 or 60 degree angle, and you have diamonds. And diamonds are done nothing but glow in our quilt. And notice now, light and a dark and the movement. If you have some blocks that it's only dark with dark, notice it how calm it is. By having the lights in it, right away you have that spinning and playing and dancing on a quilt.
Right, and then see like the stars pop out, the diamonds.
Secondary
design. This is ancient because this
Isn't it?
border right here, as I look at it.
It was loved.
What date do you think this might be?
This one is I would say late 1800. So it's definitely, it's not a very old quilt, but it's very loved quilt.
Yeah, and one other special detail about this quilt.
This quilt has been made by a man. And you can notice it, just pay attention to the colors, how he was receiving his fabric maybe in a leftovers from somebody else, and the piecing, you can see the waves of color coming through his quilt.
I mean, I see this wave of blue and red that just comes through right there.
Yeah,
that is...
you could see it when you open the quilt, and it's a part of the book, Handful of Scraps. So full picture.
So we can get the full version in the book.
And I love diamonds. So in this quilt, I want to show you how light, so most likely in the past would have been a muslin, just bonds the colors to the front and gives them like a front stage. And notice that none of the stars have to match in the blocks with each other, so that way you don't have to worry about your points. You just enjoy the scrappiness. And notice some are all dark, some have 2 colors, medium and a light, and how different and how playful they are. But because of that light background, they all beautifully go together.
They all get to sing their own song.
Yeah.
Yep.
As I have been making quilts, I noticed that when I put something light or something dark between my blocks, between my pieces, it throws off the match. So this is really nice idea when you don't want to match this to this, just put a light and then it
separates them.
Yeah, and many times we have a favorite block in a scrappy quilt, and one of my personal favorite, 1806, came out Flying Geese. And
Right.
I just love this block. And when I make my scrappy blocks, I make sure that I repeat the same fabric through at least 3 blocks in a quilt. So that way, when I put my scrappy quilts together, they look so cohesive and fit together because they're like a family. They have similar DNA.
That's wonderful, and I like the way you say that because it does make total sense.
Yeah. And this perfect example of light and the dark. What happened when you reverse the color and the creating secondary design? I absolutely love the monkey red block, and this quilt belongs to my son Michael.
Oh,
Yeah,
and,
Michael.
And he's your son that just flew the nest.
Yes, he's leaving for college, and I had to add 2 rows because he grew so much. Yeah. So notice that this one, muted background, how much the quilt is mochi dye, set back, pulls back, this beautiful block. Each block has the same fabrics in it, very cool, common collected, but I brought it because of this background square.
Yeah, I do love
how
that.
it pulls back and just gives a fun flavor. So we have all this scrappy pieces from squares, triangles to strips, diamonds. You can go crazy.
You can, but
Don't
there's
you
still
agree?
some, like this says,
Yes.
I'm here.
Yes,
This says,
see?
I'm here. Yeah.
Now you're looking for this anchor of scrappiness. That pink is really what carries on. I love putting all different shapes together, and this one, rectangles and squares, gives you a fun medallion quilt. And the last quilt, notice it has all our favorite shapes, from triangle, squares, rectangles, strips, and notice it where I'm putting light because I want to push something, and when I'm putting darker background because I want to pull it back and relax. And notice how I anchor with blue from the center to the border to the binding,
All the way
to
out.
have something that my eye can rest as I look at this quilt.
That's wonderful. What do you think, everyone? Our biggest ever show and tell on the Quilt Show, and so much to learn by looking at these quilts. Now, we are not done learning from Edyta, because when we come back, she's going to talk little scraps, even littler, right? And a new way and a fresh way to do some binding, so don't go anywhere.
On the next Quilt Show, see the incredible art of Betty Busby.
It's not your normal art. In fact, she prides herself on using non-woven materials.
Get some pointers on painting and something we've never seen before.
We're getting a real irregular edge, and I love that.
Plus, have you ever been gobsmacked by an antique quilt and wish you could find a pattern for it?
Well, quilt teacher Cindy McChesney teaches us how to make a pattern for any quilt you see.
Now you see it, now you make it. Only on The Quilt Show.
Well, if this hasn't been enough already today, wow, Edyta's still going to teach us more, all the way down to her secret recipe for binding, and I have not seen it before. But before we get going, we're going to now talk about the Little Handful of Scraps book, and I really love the philosophy behind this. So tell me about it.
A Little Handful of Scraps is a combination of 30 small quilts, and what I like to do is I love to collect quilts. So some of the ones that I have collected have been antique doll quilts, small quilts.
Look at that.
Yep. But many times I make small quilts as my practice pieces. So this is an antique one that I have it. And what I love about the antique quilts, they were made by children, so you could see a lot of imperfections in them. And when I start up a small quilt, I feel like I'm a kid. I'm starting something new. I'm learning to walk for the first time. And I would practice a block like this, and later on, I would put it into the quilt, or I would keep it as a small quilt. And what I like to do is, as I'm making the quilt, I write my recipes where I push my seam allowance.
Right.
Yeah. What's interesting, oh, I'm never going to do this again, you know. So, and you can make a one, you love it, or you can make then dozens more, or you can decide, you know what, this is not for me. I'm not gonna make more of those blocks.
Do you do this every single time?
You know, many times when I come up to something new, I do it.
Okay.
I do it like
I
a
like
low
that
practice
idea.
piece.
Yeah.
And instead of throwing them into my low stash, I frame them and quilt them and hang them on my walls in my studio. Just remind me of some of the things that I have done, and also to decorate. They're perfect pieces.
Now, what about this fabric here?
Oh, this is a special fabric. It's like a mix of a linen with silk, and it's just delightful to put it on
Nice.
around it. And to be honest, the block didn't come out perfect. So it was fun to put something like this and make it even more a little bit off and crooked. And did you notice it in this case?
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, I didn't turn my binding under. I used the edge, salvage edge, so I have laundry basket right on it. And, yeah. So there's some antique pieces. Another one that I brought it, that low 4-patch. I brought it to show you how imperfect it is. So when you're setting up a new journey and you want to do something, just be a kid again. Just be open-minded, try it. It's your quilt. Make some mistakes, fall a few times. You know, when you learned to walk first time, you didn't just stood up and walk. You fell a few times.
We got a video last night of our grandson trying to walk for the first time.
Oh.
So it's a beautiful analogy.
I'm jealous. I want to have grandkids.
You will.
One day. Today we're gonna practice.
Get them through college first.
Yes. Speaking of college, this little quilt is named after Michael. All of the quilts in the book, there's 30 patterns. They're all named after children or friends that are close to my heart. And this one calls Michael. And Michael is made from 6 low Ohio stars and a low triangle border on the outside. And I love to show how I do it.
Wonderful. Okay, well, let's talk about the star first.
The star starts with, we're gonna cut the fabrics. So we're gonna cut it. We have squares in light for the corner. We have a dark one for the center. And then we have a unit right here called quarter square triangle. It is because it's cut from quarter square triangles. We want to keep the bias inside our unit. We do not want a bias on the outside. So that's something 101 quilting. You don't want to ever bias on the outside of your block, outside of your row, or outside of your quilt. That way your quilt always will hang really nice. So once we have cut our pieces, we're going to then take them, fold them right sides together, and sew it gently with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So keep folding them.
And don't pull it, because you'll stretch the bias.
Yep, keep sewing it. Once those are sewn together, let me show you what happened. They're gonna look this way. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push the seam allowance towards dark. So now I'm practicing and experimenting if indeed the seam allowance needs to push that way. And yes, it works great, because when I start sewing from the top straight down, this is gonna nest beautifully. I'm gonna finish it right here, and I'm gonna get a great low unit like this where I can open that center. And every time I do a 1/4 square triangles, I finish them, square them out.
Do you give the cutting numbers a little bit more and then tell people to square it down? Okay, awesome.
I do.
'Cause mine don't end up like this. I got news for you.
Where in my patterns, I always do exact the measurements, but when I teach and do things, I encourage the girls
just to go like up an eighth or something?
Yeah,
okay.
a little bit bigger, because then you have room to square out, and I do it myself quite often. So you will be able to make those guys, and as soon as you have those finished, you will be sewing them together into the rows with that low. Let's put this back here. So row number 1, row number 2, row number 3. Push the seam allowance towards the lights on the corners and towards the dark in the middle, and you're gonna be able to lock the seams, and we're gonna have a wonderful low block.
So cute.
Yep. And in the back, of course, you wanna open every possible seam. Yeah. So that way you can have the least bulk, especially for small pieces like this. And this is not miniature. This is just small blocks. And many times I get asked, hey, you know, is this difficult because it's small? To me, the smaller distance from A to B, the better, the less room you have to make a mistake. So I have a tendency to pull and push, and when it's a large piece, I stretch my fabric. So.
And I want to go back to this, because I know about twirling the seams on things like this. I didn't even consider doing it on the long haul.
Oh, you need to try it.
I'm
works
going
quite
to.
nice.
It works.
Yeah, and with this kind of blog, you're learning something new, and maybe you discover something different.
Right.
That, oh, Edyta didn't do this. Let me even open this seam. And every time I create a pattern, a book, I suggest things. I want you to try. And if you come up with something different, it's your quilt. It's your journey.
Right.
But making the 6 block should bring you into a level of making a perfect Ohio blocks. And now we're gonna set them into the quilt. But before we do that, we need to make the half square triangle.
These are small.
Yes. Yeah.
These are small.
Yeah, they were made with triangle paper, and I used the 1-inch finish half square triangle paper. And basically what I did is I took 2 pieces of fabric, light and a dark, and placed them right sides together. And as soon as I did that, I placed my paper on the top of it. If you would like to, you can cut 5-inch squares and do that. Or even easier, I love making my half square triangles with a little charm packs, and this paper is especially made the size for charm packs.
Nice.
Yeah. So on the days when it's a rainy day and I don't have a new idea for new design, I make a bunch of half square triangles.
And then they're
for
ready
myself.
to go.
Yep. So when I need a little quilt like this, I just go to my bucket, count out what I needed, and use up some of my beautiful charm packs. And many times in a charm pack, you have lights and you have darks, so you can pair them up beautifully.
Right.
This one is from the Crystal Farm collection.
Okay, and we're going to get back to that later because I have good news about that, right?
Oh, awesome.
So
Would you like to make one?
Yeah, and so I started it, and basically you follow the arrows.
Yes.
And you do one.
Yep.
And then you jump here, and this is where I'm at.
Round.
Whoops,
yeah.
of course I'm going the wrong way.
You can see the jump right here where the thread is. I just pull the thread to the next point and go around it one more time.
Okay.
So Alex, when you do that, you have to always remember that you need to make your stitches a little bit closer together. That's
I did
number
that,
one.
yeah.
And the second thing that I like to remember is using a nice thread like Orfil weight 50. The thread is a little bit thinner, and that would allow me not to have so much bulk in my seam because my stitches are tighter together, so lower the thread a little bit thinner doesn't build up as much in a seam. So you're doing fantastic. I absolutely love it.
I'm doing it. And I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
This machine is fresh out of the box, brand spanking new. And I want to just point this out. There's oil on here. So that if you have a new machine, don't just start on a project.
Well, the nice thing is if you're doing the paper, you will be able to pull that away.
Oh, okay, and then it doesn't matter.
The oil just stays on that paper, what it's quite nice.
Because I'm sitting here going, what in the world is going on here?
When I do my triangles, recently there's a new needle that came out called Macrotex needle, and I like to use that needle as well.
Okay, so now what?
So once we have made our triangles, let's cut it. And I'm gonna have you cut as much as I wanted to.
On the solid lines?
Yes.
Okay.
So every straight line needs to be cut, and I always start from the outside and I trim. Oh wow, look at how nice and smooth you can turn it.
I know you can turn it, it's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go here.
Yeah. And a nice square ruler is perfect, so that way you trim it, beautiful.
I've never used this paper before. I think you've got to convert here because they're gonna come out.
And you know,
now, when do I take off the paper?
I like to first do every horizontal and vertical lines, and then I go on an angle. Why do I do that? Because those lines are the most important ones. So I don't want nothing to shift and move. I want them to be cut first. And now, if I make a little mistake, nobody's gonna notice in a seam allowance, but those first lines are very important.
What sizes do you have this paper in?
They're all different sizes.
Okay.
We have a huge variety of them. 1 inch is the one that goes with the Little Handful of Scraps book. And look at how quickly we have made little half square triangle. And you can exchange with your friends, or you can just make a bunch of them for yourself. So when you need them, you have them already prepared for yourself.
I love this.
All that I do is open it up, then I go from the back and gently peel it. Look at how nice the paper went away. And take this off, and then I'm gonna trim those bunny ears, and now I can include this into my quilt.
Okay, now you've got a binding trick that I want to get onto, and look at all these. So
Yes.
that's like,
So those
that's a
are all-
treasure chest
Yeah.
right there.
And you can, in this case, I selected all of the like a brown ones out of my pack. It's a darker color because I had all these fun colors happen here. Then I also have a little fabric from my cornerstone for this area. And I love fabrics like this where you have the designs.
The stripes, right,
going.
right.
And I chose that yellow and set it
Beautiful.
up in here to match it up. So that's for this little quilt.
So quickly, let's
Yep.
do that.
As soon as you finish your quilt, you're ready for a binding. And what I like to do is, there are two ways of making your binding. And the most common way is to cut 2.5-inch strips. So that's your 2.5-inch strip. And you're gonna fold it in half, beautifully press it. Then you're gonna place it onto your quilt and sew it with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And I already started for you. When I come to the corner, I fold it, mandarin. So this is how you do it. You come to the corner, you stay 1/4-inch away, you refold the fabric right here, just like this, and you would start again and sew it. So this is the most traditional, common way of doing it.
But this is
the way
great.
how I do it.
Ricky, you want to come see this?
So what I like to do is I cut my fabric at 1 3/4 inch, and it works perfect with a 1/4-inch seam allowance and a foot on my sewing machine. As soon as I cut my fabric,
1 3/4.
1 3/4. I place my fabric on the edge of my quilt, match up all the edges, and I'm gonna start sewing with a 1/4-inch, come to the corner, refold it, and this is already done, so let me show you a corner that it's not. I come to the corner, and when I come to it, I usually crease the fabric a 1/4-inch away from this area, so when I come, I can see it. Oh, stop and backstitch or lock. This Bernina sewing machine has a great option to lock your stitch, and now I'm gonna refold the fabric just like I would normally do, just like this, and now I'm gonna start up from the top and keep going. As soon as I go all the way around, now it's time to roll the edge, and I roll it only to the stitch line. Do you see what I'm doing? Roll it, and I would go with my finger and crease it, or if you want to, you can use the iron and press it. But I just go ahead with my finger and crease it, and I just fold it this way, and now I'm ready to roll the edge around it. And here, from this side, I would come up, roll it, and I have a beautiful little corner.
Less bulk.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So notice the difference. Right here, you have all this fabric that you had it in a seam allowance 1, 2, 3 times. So you have 3 extra layers for your corner, where I only have the single layer.
What do you guys
And-
think?
Yeah,
Yes?
I think that's fabulous. I have never seen that. I have never seen
And
that.
also, I noticed for like the smaller quilts, the 2.5, when you roll it back and you want a really delicate binding, this come up far away in a bag.
Right.
So that little bit bothers me, and the stiffness and the thickness, it's just too thick for tiny little quilts. I use this on big quilts and small quilts, but especially for the small guys, I would go ahead with the 1 3/4. Yeah, when I turn this and come here, let me turn this so you guys can see it. I just come to the stitch line just below, stitch by hand, roll it, stitch, and make sure, this is super important, that your fold, see this fold and this fold?
Let's tilt it to the camera. There you go, sweetie.
Perfect, thank you, Alex. So this fold and this fold are on opposite side.
Perfect.
So that way it lays really nice and flat.
Okay,
That's
so
beautiful.
moving on, we talked at the beginning that the block of the month is also coming in a colorway, and you're still working on it, but
Yes.
Ricky,
But here we go. Look
Yeah.
at these colors.
Look at
These fabrics are going to be the second colorway. So
Yes.
they can do blue and white, or they can do this.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. And this goes,
Look at this. Ooh,
this calls
absolutely.
Crystal Farm, and it just has such a beautiful shades of pinks and reds, very traditional look to it, and they're gorgeous. The blues and greens are gonna be perfect branches.
And you have
berries.
another pattern wildflower
Yeah.
with it too.
Oh yes, just I wanted to show you guys this quilt. If you have a bundle like this, a fat quarter bundle, it's wonderful. Just cut it into strips, and it shows you beautifully how the colors are shading. It's a great collection.
I wish this could go on and on, but wait, there's more in the after set.
We are.
If this isn't enough, you're not going to believe.
Yeah, just roll through the credits and then
what she's doing.
and then we'll have a little chat with Edyta afterwards. Yeah. So everyone, thank you for joining us. Edyta, thank you for a fabulous day.
Thank you
It's been
so much.
wonderful.
It's always a pleasure. It's my honor to be here.
And what a way to start the new year. Happy New Year.
Everybody, remember it's a new day every day. Absolutely.
Remember, we're not quite done. There's still the after set right after the credits.
Edyta, not only do you write the books and make the quilts, you have now gone into another dimension by writing a children's book about quilting.
Yeah, I was lucky that my publisher offered this option to me to do a children's book. And the book is illustrated with my fabrics, but it's super cool. It's a lovely little story about a rainbow nest, a mom getting ready for her baby, and she's making a quilt, and a bird is getting ready for her little chickadees, and she's filling her nest with little swatches.
I'm gonna put this camp. Look at this.
Oh my!
Isn't it? It's beautifully illustrated by Sue, and she illustrates books for American Dolls and Disney, and she helped me do the pictures for the book.
And the actual fabrics in here are your fabrics.
The actual fabrics are from my jelly bean collection. Yep. And what is so special about this book, in the end, you have the pattern for the quilt that it's right here on the table.
This is the quilt.
Yep. It's all done with batiks, one cute little background, and in the center you have a mommy with the nest and 3 eggs.
And the little rainbow fabrics that are in there.
Yeah.
And what's without spoiling the plot, what's the gist of it?
We have to let the kids go someday.
So this is a personal story.
It really is. I have 3 children, so that's why I have 3 little eggs in the nest. And this year, my Michael, my youngest one, is going to college. And it's bittersweet to see him grow up to be a beautiful young man and going to college, but also leaving me. So I'm going to be doing a lot of quilting.
That's great. Well, I think this will always be a treasure for you as well because it relates to this chapter in your life, which I think is a good chapter. It's a hard chapter probably for the transition, but you've got to be very proud of the kids because they're becoming their own people, right?
It's a super exciting moment when you're waiting for the baby and getting ready for the baby, but it's just exciting to see them that they can stand on their own and do beautiful things in the world.
That's great.
Can I love this show anymore?
I don't think so. Edyta, thanks so much for all your inspiration and everything that you bring to quilters worldwide.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.